Yeah, Ranger also really appeals to people as a first class, and then you're like, wait, what? I gotta learn spellcasting? What? I think Ranger's got some real bad buy-in there too. I think that actually Ranger getting spellcasting, I'll go out on a limb and say this, could be a turnoff for a lot of people trying to play the class at first. I actually know several of my friends that rolled up a Ranger as their first class ever and just completely ignored that it got spellcasting. Completely ignored it. They were like, oh, I don't want to do that. My Ranger shouldn't do that anyways, right? And like, okay, these are the complete opposite end of what like optimizers or like heavy, crunch guys would do, right? Heavy optimizers are going to be like, of course I'm going to get spells. Yeah, that's going to make it better. But like the fact that Ranger gets spells to some people is a detriment because like it hurts the barrier for entry for the class. They think that spellcasting is a little bit complicated of a system and they don't want to have to track that stuff, so they ignore it. Has anybody else seen this where people are like, I want to play a Ranger because I want that to be what my character is, but I'm going to completely ignore spellcasting? I have seen this happen twice. But like they want to play the class, so they'll just ignore that and roll up basically what they could have gotten way better out of a pure fighter. They just want Ranger on the character sheet. Yeah, it wasn't just a meme. What some people were wanting, or I guess coming into D&D, first off, the idea that Ranger should be the kick-ass archer. And this may come from experience in WoW, right? Where like over in WoW, hunters were like the better archers and all that stuff. They move over into D&D and they're like, okay, I really want to play an archer. I'm going to roll up a Ranger. So people have the experience, right? Of, well, Legolas feels like he would be a Ranger, so I want to play that. And so then they go and roll up a Ranger, and then it gives you nothing but like survival stuff at first level. And then they're like, okay, I guess I'm going to keep trying to shoot my bow. And then they eventually get their fighting style and they're like, okay, archery, cool. And archery, I'm not talking crap about archery. Archery is a great fighting style. But like, then they get spells at that same level. And then it's like, wait, Legolas can't cast spells? Like, what? This is, huh? And it just, there's an off sense of that, right? And I know you can reflavor it, whatever, but that's the thing, is that whenever you tack spellcasting onto a thing, if you tack spellcasting onto a thing, you are telling people that they need to track a thing now. And for people that want to just play the thing that they're like, no, I want to shoot a bow really well, and I really like being called a Ranger, why would you not just roll up a fighter? Legolas is Battlemaster Fighter, right? And this is a failing of the 5e system. I think what you can do is basically take Ranger and just make a few changes, and I'm talking a few, with like surface level changes. Rename it as the Warden, or whatever you want to rename it as, right? And then make that its own class. Because right now, the 5e Ranger is just it's a paladin with a different coat of paint and no smite, which, yeah, or aura, really. And whatever this new edition is going to be, I think that one of the things that we could look back to is like, how did Ranger flop a lot over this system? Ranger fails at a few different points. Number one, it's pretty weak, but number two, like, it doesn't fulfill the fantasy. The most important thing is the fantasy buy-in that people have whenever they come to play this game, right? The problem is whenever you see the class name, you see the label on the 10, and then you buy it in, and then you're like, wow, this is not what I was thinking I was getting into. That's a problem. Whenever I did my revision, this was one of the things I was trying to address. I was like, how can you make the Ranger feel like it's got its own unique, somewhat similar to Rogue in a way, unique combat feature? I had seen what Heavy Arms did with his gunslinger, and I was like, oh man, you might have fixed Ranger here. And I talked to him about it, and he was like, no, this started out as a Ranger revision. And I was like, okay, how can we tie this in? What would be the cool thing, right? What I did whenever I was doing this, my Ranger revision was I wanted to make it to where they got a feature at first level that made it feel like I can roll up that archer, or I can roll up this martial, dueling swordsman, Drizzt Warden thing. In either or, I'm going to feel like I get a unique thing here. And that was why I started looking at different video games and what they had done for rangers or hunters or whatever. And overwhelmingly, my favorite mechanics were always ranger should be a crit reduction class. A hunter should be a crit reduction thing. You want to crit more often. That's like their bread and butter. And that's what Heavy was doing with the crit reduction mechanic that was over in the Gunslinger. But his is more like a barbarian state. So like, I thought with Favored Foe, if we're taking away something like Hunter's Mark, can we make it to where like, ooh, they get that cool mark here, right? I thought that this could really scratch that itch. Have I thought that Rogue Scout is just that ranger without spells? Yeah, I mean, sure, but it's not a ranger. That's the problem. We're talking about a core failing of the class design here, and that's just, it didn't meet up with the fantasy, Two-weapon fighting is also not good in 5e. Yeah, sure. And that's the problem with the, two-weapon fighting. But, like, I wanted this to at least feel like whenever I stepped into this class, I got a core feature that felt like it communicated the idea of, like, you wanted to roll up an archer ranger for a certain reason, probably crit reduction that you could get out of this, especially with the whole marking mechanic that they get right here, right? And why would you roll this up over a champion fighter? It's because eventually that crit reduction is going to go even further for you and quicker than it would for the champion fighter. I think what you could do, and this is something I thought about the other day, was like, you can attack twice instead of once whenever you take the attack action on your turn, or make it to where you can forego one of these attacks to gain advantage on the first, or whatever, By doing so, you can forego one of these attacks to instead just have advantage on the attack during your turn. That makes a rogue multi-class look terrifying. Like, oh, so scary. But, like, rogue can kind of already do that? Like, Champ Fighter also isn't limited to the crit bonus on the marked target. Yeah, it's just general crit, right? The 5e Ranger, the reason why you want to get rid of spell casting isn't because of a power thing. It's not because you think that the Ranger needs buffs or nerfs. It's that the flavor is off. It's like you ordered steak and they sent out a salad, right? Like, no, like, I get it. Like, this is food. It's not bad food. It's not what I wanted, though. Oh, I 100% think that that D&D would be a lot better if we had, like, an official warden class. Yeah. Take the Ranger. The next edition of D&D. All right. Let's say this. Wizards of the Coast. Take what you have for the Ranger. Repurpose it. You can even pull a little bit from the Ancients Paladin. Repurpose that into a Warden class. And then start drawing some inspiration from some of the other midline, D8 classes. Ranger doesn't need to be a D10 class. There's not a whole lot that really informs that the class should be a D10 class. The problem with Ranger isn't really a power issue. It's the fact that this class is not meeting up to the narrative of what the name on the front of the book wants to evoke, right? Whenever people are rolling up a Ranger, they're wanting a martialist. People that are arguing otherwise have seen the 5e Ranger and like the way that it performs right now. The hard thing with that now is if you make changes to this class without somehow making that same character option available in a different way, you're going to get backlash from the current Ranger fans, right? So that's why I recommend basically take what you've already written for the Ranger. May have to come up with some new subclasses. I know. We're talking about some work here. Now, take what you've already written for the Ranger and repurpose it, thinking about like maybe a little bit more Paladin in mind, right? We get another frontliner. Interesting. Make that this new idea for, bring back the Warden, right? It was such a cool idea. You want to stick with that name, Warden? Maybe go, I don't know, Guardian or something. Just a cool frontliner. And then you open up more territory to where Ranger can be this interesting, draw inspiration from video games. I know that you guys draw inspiration from anime, all right? Let's look at some video games. Crit reduction and crit mechanics have been a thing for hunters. This is like, it feels good. We know it feels good in certain video games. For hunters to be another form of like DPS. But I mean like usually more punchy DPS, more unique DPS, and this idea of crit reduction, right? Hades, Artemis is all about critting and unique things that happen on crits. Oh man. The problem right now is that 5e is stagnant. We aren't getting a lot of innovations happening on this system. And I think that Wizards is kind of doing their like, all right, we're about to roll over to the new thing. Oh, we might introduce some stuff in a campaign setting, but I don't think we're going to see a new class. I think that 5e is locked in at 13 classes. Or what I would hope WotC does is don't throw out the Ranger that you currently have. Repurpose it into a different class. Warden, like you all have already made in the past. Take that Warden, new class, Ranger. I don't know. Let's focus on what we can do to make Ranger more of a martialist. Make it to where it hits the flavor notes that you guys had originally promised with the class that just hasn't happened. All the changes that have been being made to Ranger are not addressing the initial first big issue. And that is that Ranger does not deliver on the promised fantasy that the class name says. The class name is trying to communicate to you. We know this because your big IP, your flagship world, Forgotten Realms, most famous Ranger over there, Dristo Erden, you can't make them with the 5e Ranger. You can't make Aragorn, you can't make Legolas, right? Like, it means that there's a failure in the narrative core of the class. So I would really hope that in this new edition, that is the first priority whenever you're talking about making a new Ranger. And that should be like, boy, that should be a non-starter. I hope that you guys have a big whiteboard there in Renton. And you have like, all right, these are ideas for the new class, the new classes for the new edition, right? And we're like, all right, let's get to Ranger. What are our non-starters here? I hope the first goddamn thing on that board is spells. Spells are non-starters for this new Ranger. In my opinion, that is the one thing that WotC will have a horrific time trying to fix about this. And that is that they built us a Ranger that is not the Ranger. Part of this problem isn't just that, like, WotC was waiting for the right moment. Part of this problem is, if I'm remembering this right, the 5e Ranger is currently written into the OGL. So they would have to literally gut part of the 5e license. But I think that that would be a lot, like, that might be actually kind of expensive. Like, I don't know if Les is in the chat or anything, but like, you know, here we go. I'm looking at the OGL right now. Me looking at the OGL, here's the Ranger in there, right? So if they were like, you know what, we want to gut spellcasting from it, they might have to rewrite the goddamn 5e license. And I think that that's the reason why Ranger never got an overhaul like what we were thinking, is because it would require basically scraping and hiring a lawyer to redo a license. Yeah, it's why they did optional class features rather than reworking the Ranger. Yeah, I think that's the reason entirely why we didn't get a rework of it, was because it's easy for them just to put out, like, basically just to say, hey, you know what? We're going to offer you some optional features in here, and you can take them or leave them, whatever. But for them to say, no, we are gutting a class from the ground up that has been a core part of the thing since we introduced it. Did we rewrite the license with 5.5 anyways? Chances are, I think so, yes. I mean, a new edition isn't just like, hey guys, we're putting out a new book or whatever, right? It's, no, we're hiring lawyers to make sure that this stuff is protected IP. Like, it is expensive for WotC to write a new edition like this. They had better be confident that what they have is a banger. Like, they had better be super, super confident in the system in order to do that. then maybe make the warden the spellless ranger. I don't think that's the expected fantasy of either of those at that point. They could just make something Tasha-like that gives the optional feature. That was the direction that they leaned at one point, where they were trying to do a ranger that you could either get a companion or this branch that did spellcasting or this branch that did another thing. But I do think that the core of it is literally just all the fact that the ranger was printed in the OGL. I think that WotC would have been way quicker if they would have opened up the idea of, you know what, we need a... God, this would be a legal nightmare. I don't think that they could ever do a flexible license that's like, you know what, here's the OGL, we may change it. And if at some point that we do, that's our new protected copyright, and you guys can't violate that. I don't think there's any way that they would actually be able to legally enforce something like that. And it's hard. I mean, I don't envy WotC. You know, at least I have the liberty of whenever I write something and something becomes a problem with it later on, I can address it with all it takes is me changing a PDF out. WotC, oh God. How do you redact 10 million printed books?